It's actually quite easy to explain flat organisations, and I shall do so, and you'll say, but I knew that, and you'll be right. What's less easy to come to terms with are the applications of flat organisations, and even harder, the implications of flat organisations for our society. So I'm going to divide what I have to say into three parts, beginning with an explanation. We're talking here in terms of social network theory. That is, understanding how people communicate with each other and the nature of the structures and organisations that they create within their societies. We are very used to forms of communication which are hierarchically based. That is to say, they have someone at the top, other people a bit further down, and the rest of us basically beneath. And you'll recognise that our economic system is very much structured along a hierarchical line. The justice system is another such. Most of our established systems are hierarchical. I've been watching a whole set of material about the French Revolution and the Sun King Louis XIV in France, and the strong, very strong hierarchy that existed in France. And the natural consequence of that hierarchy was its total overthrow in revolution. What happened subsequently was the establishment of another hierarchy, unfortunately. And so it goes. But it doesn't always have to be that way. There is a relationship between hierarchy and authority. It is deemed to be the case that people further up the hierarchy have inherently to themselves, or have acquired, or are allocated more authority than those who are lower down the hierarchy, down the totem pole somewhere. The further you go up, the more authority you have, and often the more resources are allocated to you, so that it becomes a matter of egotistical development for people to climb the ladder, the hierarchy, in order to obtain the prestige, the rewards of being at the top of the pyramid. I like to think at this moment of Nick Smith as he comes down the other way, as he descends the greasy pole, and he doesn't know yet just how far and how traumatic that descent is going to be for him. But anyway, people in positions like him, who the position that he was in, are very high in the hierarchy, empowered immensely, and able, apparently, to take unlawful actions without consequence. This is directly concerning for us, of course, in our court case against the minister, as he then was, for exceeding his powers. A flat organisation, by contrast, is one which may have little bits and bobbles of people who take responsibility, who are allocated a little extra authority, but there's no orders being delivered, there's no judgments being handed down that people have to deal with somehow. Everybody contributes. These are the things that we call social networks, generally speaking, and you are part of many such social networks, and this meeting is a meeting of people who have common interests. So this is not exactly a group, it is more a group of network participants, if you like. We would not be here were we not already involved in some way, not only in a particular network, but in a network that may be connected to this 1080 network through our own selves. we may be nodes that connect, for example, if I may, the possibility of external funding or concerns about the Brook Valley or concerns about fluoride, as they might be, whatever those matters may be, they connect with each other through us. And so we disseminate our information and our support and our human fellowship through these flat organisations. They don't have to be hierarchical to be effective. So that's the explanation. I'm sure you understand. If anybody's got any questions about that need further explanation, it's possible, of course, to examine these things in some detail. I actually did my first thesis on social network theory, and I was looking at family daycare in New Zealand back in 1981. And it was interesting to see how carers and providers and parents and the children themselves and the organisers operated their networks so that resources were brought to bear on needs. This doesn't seem very complicated, and in fact it isn't very complicated, but it is tremendously underrated in its significance for our society. Applications. When we focus on poisons, to some extent we're limiting our field of application. It is quite possible to locate this activity within a framework of injustice. To say that what is wrong here is that decisions are being made that are unjust, unmade and implemented that are unjust. We have that experience in common with many other organisations, many other groups, who can say, look here, this business, whatever it might be, it might have to do with real estate, for example, the way that we are being controlled is unfair, and we're not being able to get any traction for our concern. We meet, we group, we communicate with each other about this, and still what we find is that the society has adapted to be able to manage our concerns, to somehow wave them away or to smother them, or actually to control our expression of them in distinctly repressive fashion. And the cannabis debate, for example, is clearly one such. But there's a very wide range of concerns that come under the rubric of justice or injustice, the lack of it. When I talk about application, I'm suggesting that we give consideration to how we link with those other interest groups, those other interest networks, and they give consideration to how they link with us as well. That there is promotion within our society of the potential that lies within our own power, provided that we have good forms of communication. Now, this may seem a little bit pie in the sky, involves people in doing a lot of stuff. We've all got lives to lead. And all of those things are true. And I actually think that the situation has changed significantly in a way that we've never previously experienced, and we've got only the haziest of understanding of how it's going to develop in the future. And that is, of course, the digital revolution. The fact that we now communicate so freely, though not everywhere, via Facebook, for example. I was quite opposed to Facebook for a long time. Didn't like the idea of it. I was quite conservative, really. But then I started using it, and I realised it's actually a very good piece of software. It does an awful lot without actually controlling you all that much. Some, yes, it does. But we are able to make good use of it, and we are making good use of it. And this is something I sit down there in my office down in Birchfield, and I turn on my machine, and I'm engaged in a conversation with a young man in Nigeria about what's going on in the brook, and he telling me about what's going on in Nigeria. We can do that, and we do that. We do communicate, and the power to do so is only young. It hasn't reached any kind of culmination. I'm fond of saying that we do not know the future. We only think we do. We project into the future that with which we are familiar, our own lives, the kind of basic patterns of existence that continue in uninterrupted ways, and we don't see the revolution coming. If you look at a movie, say from 20 years ago or even 15 years ago, whatever it is, there's no cell phones. And what's one of the things that you actually notice is that nobody's talking on the cell phone to each other. They have to go to a phone booth when they want to make a telephone call. And they do. And it looks so bizarre. Wireless. We listen to the radio and then television. This is all old hat. But when we look ahead, we don't see clearly the potential that these revolutions hold. And what I'm suggesting is that there is a direct link to be made between the evolution of these communication systems and the applicability of social networks, of flat organisations. We are in a lot better position to conduct unmediated discussion with each other than we have ever been. That potential continues to grow, and the capacity of the hierarchical systems that we wish to oppose is less in that area than they would wish to have it. We're capable now of making and maintaining communication systems that are absolutely not hierarchically based, that are not indeed dependent upon the current corporations that control them, that not dependent on Google or Facebook or whatever it might be. They will come and they will go. So when I look at implications, which is what I'd like to do finally, I'd like you to consider the potential impact on our civilization and our society of the convergence of flat organisations and our increased capacity to apply that type of communication, that type of networking across the globe. I don't think there'd be any doubt in anyone's mind here of the dangers that we are facing as a species, and that we have introduced to a great many other species. It doesn't take a lot to make the link to Kia and 1080, for example. On the issue of climate change, one calls it issue. On the dangers of climate change or overpopulation or nuclear war, none of which are about to go away, it seems to me to be unlikely that the hierarchical structures that we complain about will in some fashion solve or mitigate the problems that they have created for us, and that we resist asking ourselves, do we in fact, can we find the power to overturn this situation, to change it so fundamentally, quickly enough that the hazards that they are introducing into our world can be overcome. It's my belief that there is the possibility of a society which is essentially non-hierarchical, that is not dominated by hierarchy, that is not dominated by attributed or gathered authority, where people are not in charge unless that is an endowment that is provided to them by the people in their immediate support networks and is done through cooperation rather than through competition or through coercion. That's why I'm holding on to a residue of optimism about our collective situation, whether it applies at the local level or whether it applies at the largest of scales. It's true we don't have much time. We do have to put our energy into it in a way, we and our children and grandchildren have to put our energies into it in a way that we may only as yet be dawning on us. But I do think we have that capability. I think we have the potential available to us, and I think that flat organisations are the way that people are going to depend upon in order for this vision of a sustainable planet to be realised. Thank you.